the cabin that she found. So that's where we're at. Kind of dangerous.
A really
Okay.
good.
So this is
Good
chapter
mom.
58, and it's called The Cabin. If you're,
This is a
you
really
should
good
mute
mom.
yourself. You should mute yourself. Okay. What did you want to say, Fiona? Did you have one thing you wanted to say before I start?
Roz is being a good mom to protect her son.
You are so, that is so wise. You're right. And I'm glad that you made that observation. Okay. Chapter 58, The Cabin. The hailstorm was brief, but it was violent. Its icy stones were quickly melting away, but the damage would linger on. The valley was littered with shredded leaves and wildflowers. Wounded animals were hobbling back to their homes. Several unlucky birds lay limp in the grass. Sorry. Um, Inside the cabin, Roz was standing by the window. Inside the cabin, Roz was standing by the window. She held Brightbill in her arms, his bruised body wrapped in an old blanket. The robot knew everything there was to know about caring for animals, but all her son needed was time. His injuries would heal on their own. Go on without me, Ma, said the goose in a weak voice. I'll catch up to you when I'm feeling better. Now, do you think Roz is going to do that? Do you think she's going to go on without Brightbill? Yep, Heath is saying no. Because Fiona said she's a good mother, right, Fiona? That is ridiculous, said the robot. What kind of mother would leave her injured son behind, like Fiona said? But Ma, stop talking, interrupted Roz. You need rest. Brightbill tried to argue, but he was already falling asleep. The cabin was simple, just a square room with a wood stove, two chairs beside a table, and a couple of cots rotting in the corner. Dusty mugs and bowls sat on a shelf. Otherwise, the walls were bare. It was clear no humans had been there for a very, very long time. However, it seemed that some other creature had moved in. The whole place had a stinky, foul odor. Lumps of poop were strewn about, and little footprints trailed away from the dark hole in the floor. Roz leaned over the hole, and in the language of the animals, she said, Hello? Is anyone down there? Something moved, and then a pair of shining eyes looked up from the darkness. Who are you? Said a voice. I didn't invite you into my home. I'm sorry to intrude, said Roz. My son, my son and I were only trying to escape the hailstorm. Your son? Said the voice. Is that him in your arms? Let me see. Very gently, the robot lifted a fold of the cloth and revealed the sleeping goose. He must take after his father, said the voice. He is my adopted son, the robot explained. My name is Roz, and this is Brightbill. The shining eyes blinked, and the voice squeaked with excitement. You're Roz and Brightbill? The birds have been singing about you for months. You're living legends. Technically, I'm not living, said the robot. You seem pretty alive to me, said the voice. Either way, it's nice to meet you. They call me Sprinkles. With that, the creature crawled up through the hole in the floor. She was covered in black fur from her nose all the way down to the tip of her fluffy tail. Well, except for the white stripes running down her back. What is she?
A skunk.
A skunk. And is that why there was a foul odor, a stinky odor in the cabin?
Exactly. I was thinking it was a skunk.
Yes, she's a skunk. Sprinkles. The robot took one look and stepped backwards. Sprinkles frowned. You know, Roz, skunks only get stinky when we're nervous. Are you
Now,
nervous? Are you
now
nervous?
I know why their named Sprinkles because because skunks like to take food.
Yes, they do. Okay. Let's see. Are you nervous now? Well, sort of, but in a good way. I'm honored to meet you. Please pull up a seat and tell me what brings you here. Sprinkles hopped onto the table and listened as Ross described their journey. The skunk was a very good listener. While Ross spoke, Sprinkles nodded politely and said things like, "Oh my," and "Is that right?" and "You don't say." This went on until Brightbill began to stir. "Ma, I'm thirsty," he whispered. There's a creek right out back," said Sprinkles, "and those might be useful." She motioned to the bowls on the shelf. "Please help yourself to anything. My home is your home." It turns out skunks can be quite hospitable. Sprinkles invited the visitors to stay as long as they liked, and so our friends spent Brightbill's recovery in the cabin. The goose mostly slept. The robot brought him water and food, and the skunk made sure that they were both comfortable. A few mornings later, sunlight streamed in through the window and onto Brightbill. He was squawking and waddling and fluttering through the cabin. His injuries had healed, and he was eager to continue the journey. "Thank you for everything, Sprinkles," the robot waved as she marched away from the cabin with her son on her shoulder. "Glad I could help," called the skunk. "Misunderstood creatures like us, we got to look out for each other." And this is the next chapter, and it's called The Strange Wilderness. Do you see that picture?
Can you keep reading?
I will.
Yay. It's Isla just came in.
Yeah, I will keep reading.
Yay.
Chapter 59, The Strange Wilderness. Another gloomy day had settled over the mountains. Here and there, the sun broke through the clouds, and bright streaks came shining down like spotlights. One of those bright streaks swept over a rugged mountainside and found our friends.
Look, it's Brightbill.
For a moment, the robot and the goose basked in the warm sunlight. Then the patch of light moved on and rolled onto the next valley, where it had sparkled across a strange industrial site. That's what this is. A strange industrial site. Do you guys see that? A patchwork of large, boxy structures was nestled among the trees. Broken walkways clung to the walls. Ramps and pipes slanted up from holes in the ground. The robot's computer brain identified the site. It was a deserted coal mine. This was a strange kind of wilderness scattered throughout the mountains. Throughout the mountain range were ghosts of human activity, overgrown railways, rusted automobiles, spindly towers perched on mountain
Look it.
faded. Oh, please mute yourself. Faded. Okay, I'm sorry. Faded signs with messages like "no trespassing" and "no hunting." It seemed humans had once lived and worked in this wilderness, only to leave it all behind. In places though, there was still activity. Robot activity. Armies of robot workers methodically dug new tunnels and built new dams and worked in new mining operations. They took down abandoned buildings and hauled away truckloads of litter. Our friends were curious about these working robots, but they kept a safe distance and they went on their way. So let's find out what happens next. And they're on their way again. Here, I need to turn the lights on. Come on, lights. There we go. Okay. Chapter 60. This one sounds kind of scary. The Hunters. Crack! A gunshot echoed through the mountains. There weren't many hunters willing to trek into the wilderness, but those who did were serious. They camped out, wore camouflage, and fired traditional rifles for the sport of it. Crack! Roz and Brightbill were desperate to stay clear of the hunters. However, that was proving to be very difficult. The trees were tightly packed together, and the undergrowth was tough and tangled. So they followed the deer paths and that cut through this part of the forest. But they never knew when or where the next shot would be fired. Crack! The gunshots were growing louder. Our friends slowed to a crawl, afraid of being seen or heard. And then the chatter of forest animals fell silent. Crack! A bullet whizzed through the undergrowth and a deer went bounding away. At the same time, birds screeched and flapped into the air. Unfortunately, one of those birds was Brightbill. Scared and confused, the young goose fluttered up to a tree limb just as two hunters emerged from the bushes. "What's a goose doing alone in these mountains?" said Hank, staring at Brightbill. "And what's it doing in a tree?" "There must be something wrong with it," said McGill. "Maybe we should put it out of its misery." Oh my goodness. Hank reloaded his rifle. "We're here to hunt deer," he said, "but it looks like we're having goose for dinner." This is scary. Had the hunters known Brightbill the way they do, reader, I'm sure they would have left him alone, but they knew nothing about him. To them, Brightbill was just another goose, a meal, and they were getting hungry. The hunter raised his rifle. He took a deep breath, and his finger reached for the trigger. And then a fierce gust of wind suddenly blew across the forest floor. No, not wind, footsteps. Something was stomping towards the hunters. The rifles were ripped away and bent into hooks and thrown aside. The men had hunted all manner of beasts, but they'd never come across this, well, they didn't know what this thing was. It looked like a tree stump standing on two roots with branches hanging from its side. The men stumbled backward, eyes and mouths open wide. Then they turned and ran. And their terrified noises trailed off through the leaf litter. The goose was terrified too. He slumped off the branch and into his mother's arms. The poor bird was trembling with fear, but he was unharmed. "I am so sorry, Brightbill," said the robot. "I should have acted sooner. You are safe now, I promise." Whew. Okay, what do you guys think of that one? Who wants to debrief about that? William, what do you think about what just happened?
I like it, and I'm inside a box.
I see that you are. Riley, what do you think?
That was scary.
That was scary. Hendrix, what do you think?
Well, my iPad, it kind of turned off, but then I got it back on, so I didn't hear the rest.
I recorded it, but you want to know what happened? What part did you not hear?
The rest.
So where did you hear where Roz? She was camouflaged like a tree trunk, and she ripped the rifles out of the. Here, I'll read that part to you. They heard wind, no, footsteps. Something was stomping towards the hunters. Their rifles were ripped away, bent into hooks, and thrown aside. The men had hunted all manner of beasts. They'd never come across this, well, they didn't know what this thing was. It looked like a tree stump standing on two long roots with branches hanging from its side. The men stumbled backwards, eyes and mouths open wide. Then they turned and they ran, and their terrified noises trailed through the leaf litter. The goose was terrified too. He slumped off his branch and into his mother's arms. The poor bird was trembling with fear, but he was unharmed. "I am so sorry, Brightbill," said the robot. "I should have acted sooner. You are safe now." Woo! What did you think of that, Hendrix?
Good.
Are you glad Brightbill's okay?
Look at here.
Miss Childs, look at this picture I drew.
Miss
Gosh.
Miss Child,
Yes.